As Mr. Jablonski said, I was born and raised in Friedrichshafen, Germany, where the Hindenburg was built. As a boy, I flew on it on one trip, and I was privileged to go to school with many of the crew members, children, and the airships in Friedrichshafen are close to my heart. Obviously, I have seen the Hindenburg being built when I was a youngster. And my father took me to the Zeppelin company, and I saw the ship being built. I want to tell you tonight about the planning of the Hindenburg. And let me start out with saying this ship was named after Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, who was commanding the German armies in the First World War. And he later was president of Germany and unfortunately introduced Hitler as chancellor in 1933. The first airline which was in the world was a company called DELAG, D-E-L-A-G, which stood for German Traveling Company, Airship Traveling Company. The company owned 6 airships and transported 56,000 passengers safely without anybody even breaking a little finger. No airship was lost, and this happened between the years 1910 to the beginning of First World War, 1914. The legendary Graf Zeppelin LZ 127 was commissioned in 1928 and flew around the world with several stops in 1929 under the direction of Dr. Hugo Eckener. The Zeppelin company built an airship which was stationed here in Lakehurst. It was the ZR-3, which was later named Los Angeles. It was delivered to the United States Navy in 1924 by Dr. Eckener. In the United States, there were several airships built. One was the Shenandoah, which was also stationed here in Lakehurst. It was built by the Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia and was assembled in hangar number 1. The second ship was the Akron, which was stationed also in Lakehurst and which was built in 1931 and crashed in the ocean in 1933 with 78 members on board lost. There were only 3 survivors. The Macon was the sister ship of the Akron, and it was stationed in Sunnyvale, California. And this ship, these were flying aircraft carriers. It was before radar time, and the U.S. Navy thought that airplanes carried by airships as flying aircraft carriers would be the seeing eye of the U.S. Navy. It didn't turn out quite that way. It was successful that the planes took off and landed on the airships on a skyhook. Then, of course, these ships all were filled with helium, contrary to all other airships in Europe, which were filled with hydrogen, which is an explosive gas. Helium is inert and does not combine with oxygen, so it does not burn. Well, the 3 ships that were built by the United States, one the Shenandoah, crashed in 1924 in bad weather in the Ohio Valley. The first naval commander on this air base was, Navy base, was Rosendahl, and he was a commander. And he valved the tail of the Shenandoah safely down to earth. The other ships crashed also in bad weather, and no fire occurred. And in the Akron, 78 members of the crew, and Admiral Moffett, who was the force behind lighter than air in the U.S. Navy were killed. The Macon was in naval maneuvers in the Caribbean and came back and heading to Sunnyvale, California, was caught by a gust, and the upper rudder was torn off the ship, which tore gas bags, and the ship slowly sank into the Pacific Ocean. Only 2 people were killed on that ship. Tragic event that occurred in British aviation was with the British R-101. This ship was built by the British government, had a competitor named R-100, which flew successfully from the UK to Canada, and was the first transatlantic crossing with passengers on board. The R-101 was not so lucky because the ship had to be enlarged because it was under specification and did not carry enough, so they had to add extra gas cells. The ship became longer, and the British Air Minister, Lord Thompson, was to become Viceroy of India. And there was a conference in Karachi, India. So he wanted to arrive in splendor with an airship, and so this all happened over northern France, near Beauvais, which is near Paris, and the ship got into heavy weather, and the nose was ditched down. It hit the ground, and it was, of course, filled with hydrogen, and it exploded. There were only 6 crew members surviving. Well, this disaster in 1930 shook the world practiced lighter than air. And at that point, the German Zeppelin building company in Friedrichshafen, my hometown, Dr. Eckener decided we cannot continue to build ships that are filled with hydrogen gas bags. We must build a ship that is much larger, because helium will not lift as much as hydrogen, so it was about 1/3 less. And this ship was called LZ 129. So the LZ 128 was never built. It had begun in primitive initial work, but everything had to be stopped, and the Hindenburg was built. The Hindenburg had 180,000 cubic meters of gas on board, and so obviously there was no problem with the lift. But there was a Helium Act, which was introduced by Henry Ickes, who was the Interior Minister of the United States under the Roosevelt administration. And this Helium Act forbade the United States to sell any helium to any country, but particularly not Germany, because of the history of First World War, German airships attacking England. So the Hindenburg was flown with hydrogen. And the hydrogen obviously was the main culprit in this disaster that happened where we are standing and sitting now. And on the fatal flight, the Hindenburg, of course, incurred tough weather over the Atlantic. It was charged negative electricity, had a gas leak because she came in tail heavy over this field. And so gas leak was there, which was enough time had passed for hydrogen to mix with oxygen of the room air. And so there was an explosive amount of gas under the outer cover. So all it took was an initiator, that is a spark, which ignited that ship. And of course, that was May 6th, 1937, which put an end to lighter than air travel. And we honor those who have designed this ship, the crew that flew the ship, and all the landing crew that was here to receive the ship. And as it was said, we pay tribute to all these wonderful people who put forth with great courage, their lives to bring this ship down to Earth safely. Thank you very much.